All right, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining today. In this episode, we have Nicole Lindler, who is a former federal executive and presidential appointee for the U.S. Department of the Treasury and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. She is a recognized expert on housing and economic policy. She previously also served as a policy advisor to San Francisco Mayor London Breed. Nicole, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about what the federal shutdown is and impacts people. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Victor. Happy to be here and share some thoughts.
Yeah, so why don't we just get right into it? What does a federal shutdown mean, and how did we get here?
Yeah, every year Congress has to approve a set of appropriation bills to fund the government before September 30th, which is the end of the fiscal year. And if it does not do that, the government will effectively shut down or at least partially shut down. Now, in the past, there's always been some negotiation to do. Usually, both chambers of Congress will get there. However, this time it looks very different. And that's really for two reasons. Number one, this traces back to the summer. If you will recall, Congress passed H.R. 1 unilaterally, meaning the Republicans in Congress, because they are in power, were able to do a reconciliation process and pass H.R. 1, which is also known as the Big Beautiful Bill. And in that bill, it included cuts to Medicaid and other pocket rescissions that were essentially matched the Trump administration's agenda. So, included cuts to NPR, USAID, and other priorities that the administration deemed fit. Now, that was overwhelmingly opposed by Democrats. So, that was really strike one in how we got here. Strike two was that now that Congress must actually appropriate the funding for this next fiscal year, the proposal at hand does not include extending ACA Obamacare subsidies, which expire at the end of this year. So this means that people may essentially lose their coverage, their premiums may go up in November, and some hospitals are predicted to close because of these subsidies not being possibly extended. So this is really strike two for the Democrats, and they're really saying, hold on. Unlike the reconciliation process that was used to pass the Big Beautiful Bill over the summer unilaterally, there are actually Dem votes that are needed in the Senate, 7 to be exact, to come to the table and fund the government. And the Dems want to see those Medicaid cuts that were in H.R. 1 restored. Then they want to see the ACA subsidies extended in order to come to the table. Whereas the Republicans want a clean extension of the funding at the levels that they were last year. And they're willing to let the ACA subsidies expired.
Got it. So, in simpler terms, the Republicans passed the budget bill. They want to continue that budget bill, and Democrats are saying, no, hold on, let's keep these Affordable Care Act subsidies so that people won't have to see their premiums and insurance costs go up.
Correct. And
Got it.
so what we're seeing right now is a standstill.
Got it. And but by any chance, do you know how much of an impact the premiums going up would have on folks? I keep seeing things like 70% increases, things like that.
I think the estimates have been wildly all over the place, but yes, some say 50%, some say 70, some say 20%. I think it's just all over the place. But the fact of the matter is that people are starting to get letters now saying their premiums are going to increase, and they might continue to see those letters go out as we get closer to the expiration date of these subsidies.
Got it. Okay. That's helpful to know. Before we go on to the next question, just some background because um, when my fiance was an independent contractor just a few months ago, and we were looking at healthcare insurance plans, I think the lowest insurance that we were able to find on the market was about $500, $600. So to see that
Hmm.
increase, it's not a small sum.
No, it's already expensive. So let's be clear. The Obamacare, ACA, it is already expensive. And so to if that's the subsidized version of the cost, you can only imagine what the unsubsidized version will be.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So let's dig into the federal government shutdown a little bit more. So you said it partially shuts down. Can you explain what the federal government can and can't do during the shutdown?
Yeah, so like I said, the two chambers are on an impasse. So it's shutting down in the sense that all of the non-essential functions of the government will essentially stop. And so what we see at many federal agencies is that over 70% of the employees, I think I saw an estimate that that's about 750,000
Mhm.
employees that are not deemed essential are currently furloughed right now, which means they're not getting paid. And this includes contractors as well, government contractors. But on the other side of that, essential programs like Medicaid, Medicare, SNAP, Social Security, air traffic control, and the post office service is all going to continue. But what we will see is that it's slower.
Mhm.
New enrollment for some of these programs will be slowed. We'll also see anything that's like if you're taking out like a federally backed loan will be slower to be processed, things like that, because the government just is not operating at its full capacity. But personally, if you're just a regular American, you might see some parks and some monuments close. You'll see court services start to slow and cases might slow down. Those types of things that are really deemed not essential and can essentially, wait until the government is able to fund itself.
Got it. Actually, and does Congress, do the president, do the secretary, the cabinet members, do they still get paid?
So that's funny. No, so that's a funny question. I think yes, they are technically they can, but I don't know exactly what Some of them might choose not to
Mm.
take a paycheck during this time.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think before we segue to the next
but
question,
their staff is essential,
yeah,
so they are essential as well.
yeah, I think I was talking to some district staff or a congress member over here, and they said they what they were hearing is the chief of staff would still get paid, but everybody else would basically be furloughed. Um,
Yeah,
and I thought I saw in previous shutdowns, which is the next question, some members of the executive branch were taking, like cabinet members were taking the opting to not receive their paycheck while there was
right.
a shutdown.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that,
And, to be clear, once the government opens, people will receive their paychecks and back pay. It's just a matter of, how long this goes on. And there's real pain points when you're an employee to not receive a paycheck for even, 2 weeks or a month. So
yeah, definitely. So you mentioned this shutdown's a little bit different than some of the other ones. Can you talk about why this one is so much more different than what the last shutdown I think was also during the first Trump presidency?
it was. So shutdowns in general were pretty common and pretty standard throughout the 70s and 80s, though you and I don't remember that.
Yeah.
They just didn't last that long. They lasted a day or two because people came to the negotiating table. So we haven't really seen them in recent years. And in fact, you're right. The last time we saw one was in 2018, which lasted 34 days and spilled over into 2019. It was right over the holidays. And that particular shutdown, I saw somewhere that the CBO estimated that it was one of the costliest and it reduced economic output by $11 billion. The difference here is that there's no clear path to a compromise that we
Mm,
see yet. Um, you know, there is kind of a Republican trifecta going on with the executive branch and in Congress. And Democrats are are kind of at the leisure right now to finally give the fight that it seems like so much of their base wants them to give by not compromising.
Yeah. Um, this is interesting because on the one hand, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the president could basically say, yeah, we'll give you guys the tax credits. And then could they go back with rescissions and just pull it back after the bill's been approved?
Not once the bill's been
Okay.
approved. I think Republicans have said, fund the government now and then let's negotiate separately on ACA. I think there's a lack of trust from the Democrats that they will do that in, fairness. So they just don't want to take that risk. But what I'm hearing is that there's still conversations to be had and, talks going on, at least trying to make some progress. But what comes out of that, we don't know yet.
Yeah. And that's also leads me to ask, well, if if these conversations are happening in the background and there's really no clear path to a resolution, what are some of the potential leverage points or things that could tip things over to finally bring about a resolution?
Yeah, so I think people underestimate how quickly deals can be made once the real effects of a shutdown start to show. So in 2018, once people start missing those paychecks and experience delays at airports and basic services were really slowed down, it started to put a lot of pressure on Congress to find an agreement, and eventually they did. So I think there's going to probably have to be a little bit more pressure, a little bit more results of the shutdown, and a little bit of pain felt before Congress can actually come to the table and work something out. We're just in day two. So, it's still rather early. But as we go on, and if this impasse continues and people start missing the paychecks, we will see quickly Congress come together and work out some type of resolution. But right now, we are just in a messaging war between both parties.
Mm, yeah. And you were in the administration before during the last couple budget cycles.
Right.
Can you share any of your perspective on how those were different than what we're seeing now? Because I mean, Democrats also didn't have 60 votes in the Senate, right? So what did that look like?
Right. I mean, I think and I can only speak from the administration that I was in at the time. I think Joe Biden and the Democrats recognized, as is true of most shutdowns, that the party in power usually takes the blame. And so they were really quick to recognize that people would blame Biden. They would blame the White House. They would blame the Democrats. And so they wanted to avoid that scenario by coming to the table. And they did at the 11th hour. And I do remember getting very close to the brink of where we thought we were going to have a shutdown and a deal was made.
Mm,
This is a different administration. And so I think their calculation is different. They think that the blame won't fall to them, but historically, we know that, the American public tends to blame the party in power. But I will say that both parties are going to take a hit in some way because anytime you have a shutdown, it shows that there is a failure of governance. And people do not want to see their government failing them. And by not having a compromise and having kind of chaotic starts and stops when it comes to the government and to funding is never a good look for both parties.
yeah, absolutely. Um, well, you're in DC, so is there anything that you can share with folks that people might not be seeing in the news?
I think that there is a willingness definitely behind closed doors to get some stuff done. I think, there's talking points and there's messaging going on in the public sphere, but behind closed doors, there are some reasonable people still left in our government. And so I would just say, know that, there are some smart people, there are some adults in the room, and they are trying to work towards some solutions, even though publicly it may seem a little different.
Okay, that makes me feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, before we close out here, I know you have a TikTok where you share information about economic news. What's that handle and what should we do?
Absolutely. So, if you are interested in kind of hearing a little bit about what's going on in the economy, please follow my TikTok. The handle is always.nick. I talk about kind of what's going on in the economy, things to be aware of, keeping you up to date on the latest that's happening in Washington and across the greater United States.
Awesome. So make sure to follow always.nick, N-I-C, at TikTok. Nicole, thank you so much for that information. Look forward to having you on at a future time.
Thank you so much, Victor. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome.